You're going to want to put on your tinfoil hat for this one. It's Mikey Jayy on KGUP Presents.
Do you know who I am? I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
Mothers, lock up your daughters.
It's time to see Mikey Jayy. Mikey Jayy.
Are you f***ing with me?
We're dealing with one sick son of a bitch.
And you know I had to tell him. Yeah. The earth is flat. Bro, you need to check your facts. I got high up through the roof. And I landed on the moon. The moon flat too. In reality, everything is just in 2D. Like a video game from 1983. I'm side-scrolling up and down the street while y'all sleep. Call me B.O.B. cause I don't see the curve. Messing up my vibe, yeah, you got a lot of nerve. Read a book, nah, I don't wanna learn. Read a book, nah, I don't wanna learn. They say that we are king. For me and my homies, we don't say it, we just spray it. I'ma leave it, namaste it. Do your research, how much I gotta say it. Earth is flat. Bro, you need to check your facts. I got high up through the roof. And I landed on the moon. The moon flat too. In reality, everything is just in 2D. Like a video game from 1983. I'm side-scrolling up and down the street while y'all sleep. Y'all sleep. Y'all sleep.
How you doing? I'm Mikey Jayy, and we're tuned in to another edition of KGUP Presents. If you're watching this on YouTube, my days might actually be numbered because the last episode I had to cut it short on YouTube just because it was just too dicey for the entire episode to play in its entirety, and my account would be suspended right now if as we speak. But most likely the next half a dozen or so shows will be kind of like they'll have to be cut in order to stay on YouTube. I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, there's just so much stuff in the media that's going on that contradicts reality. And thanks to platforms like Rockfin, I don't have to do that anymore. Even my podcast, who I thought was just protected and, they protected free speech, it wasn't loading for certain people and it got censored. So I had to delete the word flat earth in my description. And then I had to replace it with something that was acceptable, like true earth. Go figure.
Wow.
But be sure to click the link in the description and find me on Rockfin or search KGUP_presents. I'll try my best not to keep myself from saying certain trigger words. But like I did an interview with Kyle of the Big Dumb Podcast, and it was just out of control because we just started talking about monkeypox. And, to say the least, it was just something we couldn't contain. It was just wildfire. You can also find full episodes of this show uncensored and uncut on my Patreon. You can join for as little as $3. And at the end of each month, I'll do a drawing where you can win a free T-shirt, just like the one that I'm wearing right here, which is pretty cool. All right, so on to our show. I wanted to keep the intro very, very limited. Today we have a very special guest. All my guests are very special. He and I have been chatting off and on, trying to make this happen for quite a while, but we're finally here. He's got a great show you need to check out. He is very open-minded. He does a lot of research, and he doesn't bar a lot of topics. He's gotten into like spirituality, the old world, mud floods, Tartaria, flat earth. And he's been a guest on several shows that I love, including some of my favorites like the Great Deception Podcast and Dangerous World Podcast. He's a great talker. He loves to say what's on his mind. Even if you're in mid-sentence, he'll just cut you off and say, just like right now.
Yeah, I have a habit like that for sure.
But without further ado, he's right here. Let's bring him on, the man, the myth, the legendary Random Randy of the Red Thread Podcast.
Hey, all right. Woo. Appreciate you
on?
having me on, man. For sure. And you know, it really is a no like no holds barred kind of thing when it comes to subject matter when you're wanting to have a conversation, a meaningful conversation with somebody, right?
Oh, for sure.
And you know, the unfortunate kind of moniker given to folks like myself is like the one that's not so bad as truther, right? That's not too bad, but then people will go, oh, you mean conspiracy theorists? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's unfortunate that the CIA kind of built this self-contained kind of ridicule system, you know, through things like the Tavistock Institute and all these other institutions that are kind of micromanaging and playing our little strings, our little heartstrings, and you know, all of our other different emotions. And it's just like, man, what do you do when you can't have a conversation with somebody that's like that you're actively engaged with in your daily life, right? Like
Right.
that was kind of the impasse I came to at a certain point, was like, wow, you know, there's so much more to the world out there than like just what we're handed, you know what I mean? And we're really not handed that much, you know. We've got some kind of staple things like a religious doctrine of some kind. We're handed that. We're kind of handed an alphabet, and we're handed like rudimentary, you know, kind of mathematics skills. So we're given all of these little things which don't really amount to too much of a toolkit without something like science and history to kind of tie all that together and say, all right, how did the math factor in there? You have architecture, you have history, right? So we're handed all these little fragmented pieces of like this massively like just complicated picture, you know, of that is our true history, you know, not just the one that the victors agreed upon. And that's what's in your social studies book now. But like the whole bigger picture, you know, all the way down to the little regular like Tom, Dick, and Harry. What were they doing? What were they going through, like through all of this? And so like kind of onto Tartaria and the old world, it's, you know, a lot of people talk about a reset and like the re-inhabiting of cities and things like this. And, you know, the photos are kind of iffy. A lot of them are staged, you know. These people were robber barons by trade. So they were obviously robbing somebody of something and becoming the baron of, you know, said land or whatever they're taking over. So it doesn't really speak too much to, did they perpetrate this chaos, you know, that wiped everything out or appears to have? Was this like, you know, a god type of, you know, extinction level event? What happened here? And so like just that factor, the what happened thing, like leads you down so many different rabbit holes. And I don't know if you've looked into like rabbit holes when it comes to energy events or plasma events. Have you done any looking into like maybe what happened to melt the buildings and all of this other kind of the more crazy off topic kind of Tartaria stuff? Like when you say melted buildings, people just look the other way and they're like, this guy's crazy, you know?
Yeah. And that seems to really trigger people, like the whole theory of melted buildings, that, you know, some mountain ranges that look a little suspicious and they could possibly be melted bricks. But, you know, it's a lot of speculation and it's a lot of, you know, coincidence. And it could be true, but I would have to see it for myself and, you know, just kind of investigate. But I haven't really touched that topic because I haven't really come across, you know, like John Levy came across it a few times and showed some evidence, and, you know, it might be compelling to an extent, but it's just so hypothetical that I haven't seen enough to know much about it. And I can see the correlation and how it relates and how, you know, it does kind of like look like the Grand Canyon as well, you know, like just the way that just the sides of the mountainous range, you know, and it could possibly, I don't know. I really don't know, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm with you. And it's to bring this up and discuss with somebody is very difficult because, you know, realistically, like I don't have evidence. I can't take out a brick right here and say this is a melted brick and this is a not melted brick, because I just don't have those. You know what I mean? Right. I don't have that kind of backing up of the information. But you know, we are told of at least one cataclysm, right? We're told of Noah's flood or the Great Flood. So, it's kind of a given. People understand that something drastic happened and pretty much, rewrote everything, wiped everything out. And, most people believe that this was several thousand years ago. That may very well be. Timelines get a little bit murky when you start looking at all the phantom timeline hypothesis and all this stuff. But, all that aside, like we're told of at least one cataclysmic event. And we all kind of agree on that. So like going with that and going, okay, well, if there was a flood and there was an entire civilization, right, that, essentially spanned the world or was large enough to need wiping out, I guess, I'm not sure what the real story is behind the why of how everything happened, or that it was even just a flood. It could have been a number of things that we're just not told about either, or that weren't recorded. But we have this one agreed upon cataclysmic event. And so it kind of negates the theory of fire, right? Like, based on the Bible and all that, the reckoning by fire hasn't come yet, right? That kind of is what we're told. The next time, after the flood, God says next time it'll be by fire, right? And supposedly, will, depending on how some people think, we haven't reached that point yet. We haven't reached that fiery cataclysm. But when you look at things like the possibility of melted buildings and just mass kind of devastation that you see, something ruined all of the ruins in the world, right? I mean, something definitely happened. Now it's like, all right, was that this flood scenario, or has something happened kind of since then? And, it's kind of a struggle to say, all right, is this John's revelation? All right, is this what has this happened? And was it a firsthand account? That sort of thing. I couldn't tell you. I haven't dug in. I mean, I've dug into it a ton, but it's kind of hard to pull one way or another on the whole kind of religious, reasoning side of things. Because belief systems are just that. They're systems, right? They're meant to control a mind or a group of minds. A religious system, a belief system, is a series of rituals and doctrines that, essentially you agree upon. And, but within these systems, you have their volumes of information, right? Like their doctrines that will contain stories like the flood and like Revelation. So we have this kind of a clue that perhaps this is art imitating life, right? As opposed to the other way around. Maybe this is not just a story. Maybe these are actual firsthand accounts and we're just reading them in the wrong order, or they've been put together in the wrong order. It's more fun to look at life as a giant puzzle as you're going through it and try to take the little bits of information that kind of serve your train of thought, even if later on you got to come back and wreck that train of thought and rewrite it, and it's kind of hard because you hit these like taboo heartstrings with people when you bring up religion, especially religion. It's really touchy. It's a very clever kind of, divisory tactic that has been like implemented on the entire face of the earth. It's crazy, amazing. You know what I mean? Took a lot of work to get all that done. So I respect it. But, I do also know that there's this kind of thing about putting information right in front of us, and whether elevation it's through movies, it's so bad and it's so in your face that when you start seeing things happening, and I'm not going to go into the most recent thing because that will get popped on YouTube, so we'll just leave that alone. But to see something like that happen and go, well, I saw I saw this getting planned, essentially, in a vicarious sort of way. Like you just see it unfolding beforehand, and then you get smacked with that label, conspiracy theorist. And then it happens, and you're like, well, I don't want to be right. None of us want to be right about any of this stuff. And it's just crazy. So you got to look at it like a puzzle. That's my solution to all the madness. Is like, all right, what's this kind of grand scheme working out? Like, maybe I got to play detective and piece all these things together, but coming from like an open-minded point of view, certain areas are so taboo, you know what I mean, to discuss with other people. And you really do need to have these discussions to say, to essentially create a new collective kind of memory.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I mean, what is our history anyway? It's an agreed upon set of events, right? So if we don't like the one that we're being handed and we need to revise it, we need to come together and collectively kind of create this understanding, you know, which may be what we're doing. Maybe that's the driving factor behind all this. I don't know.
Well, if I could chime in, you know, the most recent event, you know, involving a school, I find that very coincidental that it's happening at the same time that the meeting up in Davos is happening at the exact same time. So it's like they don't want you to pay attention to what they're talking about in this you know, World Economic Forum, you know, NATO meeting, you know, and they're making all these decisions without even considering what we would want. They just are making these like arbitrary decisions, and you know, we're possibly going to lose our sovereignty completely. And then, you know, and then at the next pandemic that happens, they can just lock us down without any choice, and the president's not going to be able to do anything about it because he already signed it away. You know.
Yeah, that's a lot of the reason why, you know, it's hard for a lot of us to sit and look at the world and see things unfolding, and you know, almost everybody I've ever met comes from a place of good heart, right? And doesn't want anybody or their children to become injured when they're out doing their daily routine, right? None of us want that for the other person. But, you know, to be, you know, looked at and ostracized when you say, listen, there's a pattern of events leading up to this point that screams this is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And everybody's so busy paying attention at the point before that to baby formula shortage, right? Everybody's so worried about their Enfamil and their Similac, and they're not paying attention to if the government is moving this many tons of a certain product, what else are they moving with that product? That's what I want to know. Right. You're shipping stuff over here from overseas. What else is coming with those flights that we're not told about? Just like everything that comes in through Florida and through Arkansas, you know, the Clintons are famous for that, right? You know, sourcing all their goodies from, you know, the Middle East and whatever, and through Arkansas airport, and, you know, allegedly, and all of that. So, I mean, you know, you got to look at the bigger picture, right? The formula runs out. We're shipping it in from another country. What else is coming with that formula is the first thing my crazy mind goes to. And then secondly, it's like, yes, that's important, but is it important enough to be on half the news, half the time, half of the day? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That between that and the Russia-Ukraine scenario, that's all you're seeing and hearing about. You're not hearing anything about what, you know, is a little bit more relevant to me is, you know, this Supreme Court judge getting elected that essentially has a soft spot for pedophiles, you know what I mean? And likes to let them slide on lesser charges. So there's more important things going on that just aren't being covered, right? You know, like most of us would feel they should, kind of from a kind of community consensus. This stuff isn't presented to us. And oh man, I think that's kind of why it's important that conversations like this one, and you know, all of the other ones that man, you, me, Matt, all the guys, you know, Ryan, all of us, different group of people are out having these conversations in a forum in order to engage others and kind of at least talk about this stuff and say, hey, this is going on. Maybe we can't get to a point collectively because we are very few, you know, and spread out and all in our different locations, talking digitally through this kind of barrier that's writing down everything we say essentially in real time and blah, blah, blah. So that kind of fear of that keeps a lot of people from speaking up, knowing that you're going to go on Zoom and talk to somebody and have a conversation that, you know, in a 1984-esque future, which we're heading into, you wouldn't want to have that on, you know what I mean? You wouldn't want to have that on backlog, but you know what it boils down to is like, okay, you see it happening. and this is kind of what has been kind of the struggle lately with the balance kind of side of my life is, all right, I'm seeing all these things happen. And I can almost not necessarily predict, but we'll know that there's something next and know what they have in the books, because they like that revelation of method, right? They love it. Absolutely love it. And so that method, that showing the method, I kind of like to think or understand my own way that when you look at the past and you're looking back at these cataclysms and these different, kind of cues to apocalypse and all of this that are in ancient script, or what we're told is ancient script, like the Vedic texts, the Bible talking about the flood, and the Armageddon and everything else, right? So you have all of these pieces of information, and we're pretty much handed and say, hey, these are the rule of law in your land. This is your book. You know what I mean? Everything in there is true, basically, is kind of what you're taught, from a young age in any of these places. And, you lean on that. And then what happens is you come to find out later on in life, wait a minute, there's books taken out of this. You know what I mean? There's stuff removed. Wait, what? Wait a minute. It was rewritten how many times? Translated how many times from how many different languages, all by different people that had very different translations. What am I even holding? What's going on here? What is this? Right. And then you see the etymology between Bible and Babel and Babylon, and you're going, okay, wait a minute. These are those same pyramid people, right? Like, I don't know about all this. So you start going, okay, and these are the people in control. What do I do about all this, man? What do I do? A lot of us reach that point where it's like, holy crap, I wish I never knew all of this. I wish I never worried about the earth being flat, because it led me down this. And now, like, I see everything as it's before it's playing out in my mind's eye, because I understand the patterns, and it's frustrating. What do I do? You know what I mean? Like, and so, I mean, part of my solution was like, speak to people and I guess just kind of try to figure it out day by day. And I wasn't anticipating when I started my podcast in like holiday season last year. I wasn't expecting to be sitting down like 6-8 months later, having a discussion with somebody and not really being able to talk about what's going on because it's such a sensitive subject. That I kind of anticipated being the case, but not this many number of events in this short order, and so it's like, I don't know if you ever listen to like Macroaggressions with Charlie Robinson.
He's on my list.
Yeah. So, when you listen to that for a number of years now, and you hear about the stuff going on, that people are awake to it. A lot of us talk about it. But what can we do ultimately? Right. That's what a lot of people kind of stand. Well, shoot, if it really comes down to the I can't buy, or I can't, what I mean? Buy or sell or anything without a certain thing happening to me. Most of us aren't in a position, just from a survival standpoint, to be able to deny ourselves that, you know what I mean? And then as you're talking about sovereignty earlier, if that goes out the window, then nobody's going to be in a position essentially to kind of stand up for that. And that's super frightening.
I know my friend the other day, he made the comment that, we need to get, we need to separate from the United States and be a republic again, because we're here in Texas. And I was like, well, they're just going to do what they did to the Ukraine. And if we're independent sovereign nation, they're just going to steamroll us, genocide this country if we become a republic, and then they'll just take it over by force. They'll have some third party entity like Russia, proxy war the hell out of us, and
they're showing exactly what the game plan is. If there was a group of Americans, whether it be like the state of Jefferson, popping back up out of nowhere, or it be like Texas kind of seceding, they're showing exactly what will happen in a different theater, right? You're in a different theater of war up there. So they're showing us that theater kind of as like a behavioral modification. Like, see, this is what happens when you're too free, right? Like Ukraine was too free, so Russia had to take them back. And They
Just like
flip it.
when
They
you're
flip it. They spin it on as if as if the U.S. wouldn't do that to its own
oh, they would.
lands, kind of. You know what I mean? They would. I don't see any secession ever happening in my lifetime
No.
effectively.
Because basically what they're doing is like they do with kids. You see that? That's what happens when you misbehave, and then someone's getting their butt beat, and that's what
it's super functional.
That would be us.
Yeah,
we
yeah,
would be
definitely.
that bad kid. They're like, "We'll see, Ukraine. This is what's going to happen to you."
Yeah, exactly. Or you see all those people crying on the news who've been misplaced from their home. What are you crying about that you're 5 months back on your rent because you have no money because your job shut down because of this other thing that happened 2 years ago? What are you crying about? At least you're not running from your home due to what, like at first when it started out, it was like an explosion today. Like for like a day and a half, you didn't hear anything else about it, right? Like it just kind of started trickling on. And man, I don't know about you, but everything I've ever been shown about war has been this blitzkrieg style, just chaotic, like we were shown in Desert Storm or whatever, just the night sky being lit up by explosions. You didn't see a lot of that this time. You saw a lot of weird kind of trickery with the photographs and imagery and everything, especially just coming right out of the gate, like to ramp it up before it had ever got to that point. They're like, oh yeah, and this happened. Come to find out it was something in Lebanon, like a couple years prior. That got pretty kind of well known pretty quick. But
and there's not much to take over in a bunch of farms.
It's crazy. And man, just the whole geopolitical side of things, kind of diving back into old world, when you see the structure of like our countries and things now where the borders are drawn, each country has its like little backstory. You go on Wikipedia, you're thinking, all right, I'm pulling up all the information on Switzerland or on Sweden, right? And you get this kind of series of events that happen involving some form of royalty, maybe one or two coup d'etat, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So each little group has this, right? And you dig further into that, and all you find is this kind of very specific information on these individuals, on these circumstances. So it's like it follows a formula. Mm-hmm. And all of history is kind of like that, or at least the stories that we're given as our past, right? They all follow this certain set guidelines. Okay, if you have a secondhand script, it has to be validated by like 2 to 4 firsthand scripts, which will be like correspondence letters. You know what I mean? A lot of this kind of ties in like Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War. What do we have to show that this really happened? We have these correspondence letters. And then we have, after that, whatever these institutions wanted to tell us, they use those correspondence letters to build a picture and give us a story. So we don't actually have, handed down actual accounts of a lot of the stuff that, we're taught in history class, right? Like the Civil War, for example, or the Industrial Revolution, especially the War of 1812. I think it ties to all the previous wars. In my opinion, this was the, taking over of the world by the New World Order that is fully in place now. Okay. Like these people were steamrolling for like 500 or 600 years, probably. Which is why, like, you don't find, you find the information they want you to find on anything from like 1500 on forward. Something happened right around 1450 or 1500 where there was like a changing of the guard, because all of a sudden you had all these little revolutionary wars all around Europe, kind of growing these new type of states, you know what I mean? New rulers, new controllers, new popes. You know what I mean? You had all of this stuff going on all over Europe. And meanwhile, they tell us, right? They're like, oh, yeah, 1492, Columbus landed over there. Nobody knew anything about any of that land for all the other time before. There's all this warring and everything going on, right? But you'd think if you're going to wage all out war on an entire continent, you're not going to go and check and see like, hey, so I heard that there's more land over there, maybe, right? You're not going to go and check that out with all your war machine money. Come on, you're going to know about it. And I think that a lot of that time where the Jesuits were establishing the order coming from east back west again. They kind of started out in like Japan. Most people don't believe that that's the case, but I think that they've actually achieved more of their goal there than anywhere else. If you look at the type of class structure that the Japanese, class system has, the way that the populace functions as kind of as an organism to create and to, innovate, and like it's a very well-oiled machine, right? So
Yeah.
So that machine is running very effectively, and they've also got back to the point where they've, on the tail end of it, gotten rid of all the Catholicism and most of the Christianity and put it back into, what they were intending, in my opinion, in the first place, to like kind of a pagan, kind of deityless society, right? So if they started all those hundreds of years over in Japan and were molding it, Japan's already past the isolationist Christian phase that a lot of countries are coming to the end of now. The US has its, tentacles and whatever else, but all in all, they've kept the populace pretty isolated and within their like little faith kind of subsets, right? Comfort zones, even. We're all kind of kept in a little comfort zone, and we don't think to look outside of our little box or our little belief system. Meanwhile, they've been molding places like Japan into what they are, which is a functional mechanism for creation that will kind of do the will of these tech overlords. They've got that in Japan. So they don't necessarily need to turn the US into that. But what do they need to do with the US? A lot of people wonder. And, you look at it and you find out, and unfortunately, you see these stories. You see these stories about, children disappearing, and I mean, millions and millions of people, right? And then you go, well, what? Hate to say it, but what is the U.S. for? Is all this other land for? It's just they literally look at, to a certain extent, based on the information that I've seen, they look at us as a commodity, not just your blood commodity on your social security card that, fuels their fiat bank system. Not just that, but an actual, flesh and bones commodity, man. And, I'm kind of reluctant to want to give that too much more of my energy, like looking into that. But it would be silly to say that it doesn't happen, right. that all of the stories are false. Even if some of them are true, that's bad enough. But so when it comes to the, oh man, sorry, got off track there. That's always a dark thought, man, thinking about that. And that's part of why I try not to give it too much of my energy. But because it does drag you in. It drags you in though. And it's especially difficult because nobody wants to engage in that conversation. You know what I mean?
Well, that's something that would definitely get booted off of YouTube because they don't want you talking about that.
Yeah. And it's, nobody wants to talk about it or necessarily hear about it. Hopefully someday something will happen where we can have a forum about something like that. But anyway, I don't know that it'll happen in my lifetime. It's getting a little bit tighter. But so going back to, sorry, I got way off track. Going back to like these cataclysms and, we're told about all of everything up front. There's a lot of like, in literature, even in fiction, right? Sometimes you have mentions of a different world. So like a steampunk is a big one, especially in the old world circles. Like, was there a steampunk existence, right, going on before this last quote unquote reset?
I think there was.
I absolutely with you on that. I think there was an entire, all right. So if you can think of the way our technology is now as kind of the digital side of the Industrial Revolution, right? Like, so this is a different direction than maybe it was heading at one point. At one point we have analog, cymatic, we have a lot of other sciences that are hidden from us today, being used, free energy, which really isn't that hard to kind of obtain. From what I understand, it can be extremely simple. And, most of us are generating, some form of free energy, heat transfer in our homes, like out of the kind of spout that comes off your home that has that little spinning thing when the hot air rushes out. So I mean, we're wasting all this energy with this spinning around up there and all this other stuff. And so we don't use any of that, right? So it's kind of silly to look at the old world and think that they didn't have that tech and that the steampunk thing wasn't real. Like, look at Wild Wild West, right? Got Will Smith on there. Wild Wild West, going around in the Wild West with those crazy spider walker and, you know, all this other stuff going on in this movie, those super steampunk, right? So all of these things are inspired from somewhere. And a lot of it is revelation of the method, right? Like, what fun is it to completely take over a group of people, like a whole planet, right? Or plane or whatever. We could get into the flat or not argument later, but to take all this over and not want to rub it in the faces of these survivors, which a lot of these orphans and things maybe were, you know? And then that's like, okay, well, that's where Disney comes in. Right. And all of the cartoons with all the stereotypes. You have the, the tar patch built into a lot of cartoons. You have quicksand built into cartoons. You have racial stereotypes built into cartoons to teach kids how to behave around other people. So it's a lot of this behavioral modifying kind of entertainment, right, industry that comes about after their whole takeover was complete, right? This whole, I mean, it's hard to say what to call it now because it essentially is everything big, right? Big tech, big government, big money, big oil, like they're all big. That's the family. That's the group that's had it on lockdown, you know, for a very long time. I often wonder what the catalyst was that drove these people to start taking over in the first place. But I think that this was a long drug out thing that's being hidden in the guise of something simple, right? So in the guise of, oh, there was a reset and, they just shot beam weapons everywhere, wiped everything out and repopulated and started over. And, some people I was thinking for a significant period of time, hey, maybe they just kind of auto-populated with like some form of a genetic kind of dispensary of people. I was toying with this thing.
I
like
have
if
come
there was
to that conclusion as well.
If there was a huge reset, and the etymology between Homo sapien, homunculus, human being, and homunculus is very, very kind of eerie to me. That and the stories of demons being turned into swine and cast off of a cliff, right, to their doom. And so then if we have flip side, clown world, right, post-apocalyptic world we live in maybe now, which a lot of people toyed with the idea that maybe we're post-apocalypse now, like we're after the rapture and the hellfire and the battles and all the war and all the chaos, and now we're just in that whatever happened after. And that's possible. maybe that's why it's like kind of hidden from us. Like, how do you tell a people, like, listen, why the whole time thing seems a little weird? Well, because we only came back up from underground, like 1,000 years ago, and it's been war ever since trying to take over the surface again. Like, they just don't want to tell us something like that, right? But as much as they put into these underground facilities, it seems to me that maybe there's something that we're not being led on to when it comes to, what's beneath us, especially what's beneath us, right? We're told when we're a kid, if you dig far enough, you're going to get to China. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then you hit, your late 30s and you find out that suddenly maybe the world is flat and maybe it's just octaves of existence, one on top of the other, very much like the strings of an instrument, different planes of existence. You kind of have this different key of a different realm. And like, so this crazy kind of fractal, very involved and beautiful, and ultimately like completely unknowable, right? Like you can't ever, in my opinion, say, hey, listen, I've got the secret of the world and of life and why all these things and this and that. They try to do a lot of that nutshelling on that Gaia network. These are the people that came down and taught, the Atlanteans how to build everything, and they powered the pyramids, and they give you these little interesting breadcrumbs of information, like, oh, the obelisk kind of field out in front of the pyramids was powering the pyramids, right? So now they know this. And you're like, okay, but why is it that all of these people popped up out of nowhere? And if they didn't pop out of nowhere, what's the story of the people that you conquered to take their children, right? Like these hundreds and probably millions of kids over 50 years or so were migrating from, anywhere in Europe out to the US, and were being spread out all across the US to all of these newly envisioned and built small towns in America, which is kind of weird. I'm from California initially. So I moved out to the Midwest. And started looking recently, into the old world and architecture and bricks and the differences between different colors of bricks. So all these weird different aspects of this whole kind of brick building scenario that was brought to my attention through the old world channels, hey, everything, perhaps in the old way of things, everything was built in red brick, or a predominantly red brick, due to its supposed power harnessing or supplementing kind of capabilities. Essentially, the idea is if you have red brick with iron running through it and it gets hit by the sun, it will generate a small charge and or can hold power to a certain extent. So there's all this, and it kind of works on the macro. A lot of us are used to thinking about batteries on the micro, something small you hold in your hand. But if you thought about it on just a larger scale, it would make sense that it would be less dense, you know what I mean? Than, just a small cylindrical little metal battery that you hold on to. If you go bigger, you can also go slightly less dense and still get the same effect, because, well, you have a surface area kind of differential in the energy charge. So anyway, so that's where the old world has kind of driven me, is into looking into how all this happened. What's going on here? How is it that every small town in America popped up over the same 30 years with the same floor plan, the same old school, like super old world looking buildings, right? And let's just say they were all built in this time period that we're told. Where did all the supplies come from? You start looking into that, and that brings up its own set of like crazy issues. All right, there's one quarry in America for this type of stone, but it's everywhere, right? In the 1800s, when supposedly they were just getting the trains going a little, and they had horse and buggy, and you're like, okay. So it just leads to what am I supposed to think about all this stuff? How does this tie together or play out? And, what part of this is included in what we're told is fiction? So that's just like, that's my full on like hobby right now, is trying to piece all of this together. But I'm pretty firm on that. There was at least the last 500 years have been war, very much man on man created kind of war and chaos to kind of establish or reestablish some form of dominance over what we know as the earth, whether it's in the ice wall or not. Yeah, definitely. And there's some work out there that looks into like the origins of America as a word. And supposedly it's Americo Vespucci is who it was named after. There are some that are looking into, could it possibly have been Amaraku or Amaraka, which is it's a dragon. It's a Central American dragon deity that was like a two-headed dragon. So we kind of have this two-headed serpent symbolism that we see in flags throughout the world. We have in Mexico, their flag is an eagle, killing a serpent. So that's the separation of maybe the two family bloodlines. So there's definitely some infighting, something going on there. And I think a lot of like the reason that they're just like letting people kind of run with the whole like mud flood as an overpowering grab in one kind of go, like one fail swoop, like they just wiped everything out and started over, is because it suits them. These
Yeah.
people that have been wiping out civilizations for the last 5 to 7, maybe even longer, 100 years. They don't want people to remember those past, dead and gone civilizations or ways of living. You know what I mean? They worked very hard to eliminate all of anything that would kind of sit against this massive control state that we find ourselves in now. And they've done an amazing job at it. So I don't know, that's kind of like, there's no, kind of nailing this subject to the ground. And, but then that just, so much of what happens is like, and I told you so, that I wouldn't doubt that perhaps we are past some type of fiery event that had happened, due to the kind of devastation you see in like the 1906 earthquake, right? In San Francisco. And even a pretty layman can look at these pictures of after the destruction and say that was not a fire started by a bull kicking over a lantern in a barn. You know what I mean? This is a massive city infrastructure. I mean, huge stone buildings, massive. If you see the trip down Market Street video, you can find online, and just, I mean, look at that skyline, look at all those buildings. Not to mention that those buildings supposedly were built, all of them, within something like 35 years. That entire city was built up that based on the storyline, like 35 years.
Yeah,
because an entire,
there was a photo in 1860 or something like that, and there was like nothing, just like a couple of like makeshift homes.
Yeah,
20
it's
years
really
later, it's
weird.
like a bustling city.
yeah, it just popped right up, and let's say that you had all of the manpower you needed, right? Let's say you had all the manpower you needed. Where are you stealing all of the products to build with from, or where are you removing them from? Not the wood. The wood they were chopping down as they went across America left and right. They had plenty of wood for a long time, but moreover, the brick, the stone, the limestone, right? Where are you getting all this material to build this entire city in such short order? Like, did you have it around? Like, because the logistics side of it is the biggest kind of lag time you're going to see, is just getting the stuff from one point to another. If you've ever done any looking into how things are shipped and how stuff moves around, on this plane or planet, it's pretty complicated. There's a lot going on, and it wasn't always that you could get something from one side of the country to the other in a day or two, right? Sometimes it would take several months to get things from overseas, if not longer. And then they're saying, okay, the White City was built in 2 years, 700 acres of exhibit space. And I mean, it was all safe enough for people to walk through at a minimum, structurally sound enough. So that in 2 years alone is just, amazing. Right. But like, so with the building material, you're like, all right, well, where did it all come from?
Yeah,
but then you see the
nowhere.
devastations though, but you see the devastation of all these other cities, right? Like within, 15 years or so, right around the turn of the century, there's just city after city destroyed, fire, destroyed, earthquake. And then just shortly thereafter, you have the small towns all throughout the Midwest establishing, like actually finally establishing. Most of them, it's like 1896, 1902. You'll have plaques on the fronts of these brick buildings in the downtown areas. Now, these brick buildings, they're not all built out of the same type of brick. Like, and I mean, I've been challenged to find even just one building that used a consistent brick throughout the entire structure. And it doesn't seem to happen very often. So a lot of them look as though they've been using different groupings of brick, whatever they could get their hands on. Or if you had a city being destructed up the way here in Chicago, you might have some bricks on hand here in pretty short order. So, that stuff funnels down. And so that's like kind of the dirty, dark side that they don't really want to talk about by addressing the questions. Nobody's going to come out and address the questions of where did the building supplies come from for such and such small town, or for this area of Missouri or Indiana, or, man, I think there was an exposition in Oklahoma, in Omaha, Nebraska, which was just crazy amazing. Some like Moorish and Turkish style buildings, like really weird stuff. But like, they don't come out and tell us, yeah, all of the bricks in all your small towns that we rebuilt, the small towns with, or built them, however you want to look at it, from kind of an old world kind of point of view. They're not going to say those things because it does nothing to kind of cement their status. They just want you to know that they built it. Here's the time they built it, and here's the name of the town based on such and such founder. But like, you go to every small town in America, you will find a very similar tale about a similar type of person who came in around a similar time and started this town or this commonwealth or what have you. And it's just so strange, like the uniformity with which this kind of happened throughout the country, right at the same period of time as all the orphans.
Yeah.
Well,
here in Texas, my wife and I, we went to the Buckners Orphan Asylum, and it's a giant property now, but they preserved like the main structure, and it housed over 1,000 kids back in 1851. And what was very fascinating is that the guy, I think his name is Joe Buckner or something like that. They transported his cabin from Tennessee in 1833 here in Texas, which is 4 miles from me. And so we went up there and we took a look, and then in the back of the asylum was the cabin. And I was like, holy shit, I can't believe they moved it all the way from back then in 1833. And we barely had the technology of trains back then. But we also went to a little town called Allen in Texas, and it was like a tiny museum. And what caught my attention was this little picture, and it said that the train system was operated by, it was powered by electricity, and it stretched all the way from Oklahoma, all the way almost all the way to Waco, Texas, and then once it between I can't remember where the midway point was, but it went all the way out to like 20 miles east and west of Fort Worth. And I was just dumbfounded that it was powered by electricity. And then around 1850, it started to they started to use steam powered. And then, of course, then
it's so crazy the way that and if you go and look at your average small town, we'll say small city, maybe not a small town, but a small city, like where I grew up in California, was right along the coast. And when you look at pictures of old downtown, they all had electric trolleys.
Yeah.
Right. Like it was everywhere had one of these. But think about how building that infrastructure would pan out. Why would you build that infrastructure, put them all out for 10 to 15 years maybe of use, and then scrap the whole thing? And it goes along with, of course, these robber barons, these oil tycoons, kind of being amongst the folks that were doing this revolution, right? So when we hear the term Revolutionary War, I don't so much like to think about, us having a revolution against the British, but moreover as the revolution of this world order that's in place now was actually still happening. So right. they kind of give an homage to themselves with the names of these wars, the Civil War, right? Mm-hmm. Because they took great delight in pitting brother against brother, in sending one group of people against their cousins or the next town over people, right? They took great joy in destroying the society that was here before. And, now we have no mentions of anything prior to war. Basically, if you look at history, you have things like the History of Mankind written by H.G. Wells, right? We have this kind of formula kind of system that explains to us who we're told we're supposed to be and who we're told we came from. And there's key things that are removed and left out, like kind of most notably giants, I think, is probably the biggest kind of question mark in my mind as far as how this played into, the pre kind of war era, the pre New World Order. How did these larger people fit in? What was, the paradigm then? Was it what we called medieval? You know what I mean? Like what was what was going on? How did things really work out with not just the timeline, but with like the peoples here? There was obviously enough of them to necessitate huge burial mounds. So there must have been a population, here.
Do you know the history of the rock wall here in Rockwall, Texas?
No.
The legend. And it's a 20 square mile wall that was underground.
Oh, yeah, I've been hearing about this. Yeah, go on.
It surrounds this whole territory, and it's about 30 feet deep, and it's just a perfectly preserved wall. And in fact, they use part of the wall as one of the stone settings for the plaque at the courthouse in Morocco, Texas. And they say that it's just a natural occurring wall, that they can't explain it, because the farmer that discovered he was digging a well or something like that, discovered the wall, and then proceeded to keep digging and discovered the bones of a giant. And they estimate that the giant was probably between 1,000 to 1,600 pounds. But when the universities came out here, there was like 6 universities and the Smithsonian. They debunked the whole thing, said it was just a natural occurrence, and then took the bones, the remains of the giant, and it's never been heard of again. I mean, they had a whole special on it on Discovery or Ancient Aliens.
Just the denial to share any of that information screams crazy cover up, right? And it screams all of these things to your average person. It's like it kind of goes beyond all of the other lies. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, because it's direct omission of something that people have at least kind of agreed upon is real, which is giant bones. Enough people have seen them. There's been enough documentation. I mean, you can go down the road of, well, everything's a fabrication if you want to be that guy, but that guy doesn't get invited to the party. You know what I mean? So we won't be that guy, but yeah, like, so giants, man, what in the world's going on there? Why like the crazy cover up? I was reading this book, the Smithsonian Contributions to Knowledge, I think is what it's called. And it's interesting because in the preface of the book, they explain the objective, right, for the Smithsonian Institution. It's pretty well outlined there. And it basically says to obtain information. All right. So the way that they phrase it is strange in itself if you're into kind of reading between the lines. To obtain information and disseminate, essentially in order to impart, like the way that it's phrased is, in order to put this information out there for people, we have to first obtain it. So that means they're going to manufacture it, or B, going to kind of, what do you call it? Corroborate their stuff in order to convince somebody that, hey, this is what happened. And so that's their job from the get-go. Like, that's in their standards when they first started out, was like, okay, we are going to obtain information. Yep, we're going to make sure we get that information, and we're going to make sure we disseminate that information in order to produce a certain kind of understanding
narrative.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they have done, like to such like a crazy awesome extent. The more amazing thing is that most people don't care. Most people genuinely don't care about history or what has happened.
No, because it's not entertaining. It doesn't grasp their minds and captivate them. It doesn't put them in any kind of like euphoric state, which is like what people get when they watch sports, when they watch television or a movie. They don't get that same high like you and I do when we find new information. Like,
I'll give you that. I could see that. I could see definitely that being.
I'm fascinated.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I wasn't always into,
neither was
getting my euphoria this way. It took me a lot of years and a lot of changing of myself in order to get into a position where I even wanted to learn more, to seek more, wasn't stuck in the system. Like, yes, I work, pay my bills just like anyone else, right? But I don't consider myself kind of locked in that mental state anymore. I actually do find enjoyment when I find a little piece of information out, even if it comes in the guise of like a song lyric or something that resonates with something that I've recently found out. So there's all kinds of weird little things, and it like just pieces of the puzzle, man. Just like a little bit further, a little tug on that little like red thread of information and knowledge and truth, and just get a little bit further each time. Like we're wandering through this labyrinth, and it's dark, and all we've got is this little like one match, but it stays lit the whole time somehow. But it's just one match. You can only see like 2 inches in front of you. But boy, you can really see that 2 inches. So you study that 2 inches and you keep moving forward with your little
It's funny
match.
because this whole investigation started when I discovered that the earth was flat. And I was in denial for a good 6 months, like I was like halfway there and I just kept digging and digging and digging. And then I stumbled across this whole mud flood theory. And I was like, holy shit. And I showed my wife, who watched this whole like thing by Howdy McCoskey. And then I bought his book, and that just opened up a whole different rabbit hole. And then I was like, okay, why the deception? Why hiding these structures? Why hiding the evidence of a mud flood? Why hiding evidence of a flat earth? And so I started digging and trying to piece together where it all happened, who's responsible. And part of my research is, a lot of it can be, you can go further back, but John D. Rockefeller had a huge hand in it. So did Andrew Carnegie. I mean, they had this, like, Andrew Carnegie had the Carnegie Endowment, which funded the Guggenheim. And so they place historians that they intentionally placed because they wanted information about their history to be written in a certain way. So when they started the whole public education in 1908, they had complete control of the education board completely. So they were able to just paint the picture of how they wanted us to know information from then on. And so they did away with flat earth, just did this whole, they paid money for Einstein to fund his research, to find, to link gravity and prove that we
definitely. Write all of the equations to fit the result that you want, and you will never have a problem, right? Like,
right.
And yes, although E may very well equal MC squared, that's still completely, and they still have taken, they've completely taken the spiritual etherical side out of that completely. That's the whole goal behind all of it. I mean, and it seems kind of silly at first to say the whole goal is to make you feel smaller and disconnected with God or source, but really when you look at everything that is being played out, man, all of it is in an effort to keep you from
knowing
alchemically changing your soul, right? Like,
right.
I think kind of the goal of being here, of learning information, of interacting with people, I mean, everything you do every day, like a lot of the goal of that, and when you're a conspiracy theorist or a truther or flat earther, a lot of the time it can be kind of hard to say, well, if all of this lie, then why do I, like, what keeps me pushing forward and what keeps this relevant, right? Is I started kind of looking at it as an alchemical process, right? Like you're kind of brewing this concoction within you that is your soul. You are, through time and effort and trial and error and massive amounts of information flowing through you, like at all times, you are slowly just molding ever so gently, but ever so, like, expertly. You're just molding your soul. And it's so interesting to see these problems we have in the world, to see this last several hundred years of war kind of creating this paradigm we're in now, and seeing that the change that it's made in people. I don't know that 50 years ago there would have been a group of people who would come together and speak about philosophy, history, science, everything
did
on their own, right? But they were part of that certain kind of group or club. And if you weren't part of that club, you kind of knew your place in society and backed off. It was kind of a cultural norm, you know. If you were not part of the in crew or in crowd, you just stayed to yourself and just shut the F up, you know. And yes, people have in a good and bad way have gotten louder about what they feel comfortable with expressing. So there's two sides to that, but I think on the good side is that there are groups of folks like we are having a conversation about so many different things that all kind of weirdly tie together. And it all kind of, no matter if you want to admit it or not, does tie to the flat earth lie. That being like kind of the daddy of all lies, it seems like, because
it's my foundation.
So much of my youth was dedicated to looking at slides of planets, and I mean, but it always seemed hollow to me. I didn't feel it in my heart when I was looking at these. Like, they're beautiful images from the Hubble. That's probably the most beautiful stuff was like from Hubble.
Dude, look at this logo. I mean, it was inspired by NASA. I was a NASA fanboy.
Nice. I love it.
But now I wrote space is fake.
Right on. Well, see, sometimes you got to mature a little enough to tag on your own work. That's cool. But yeah, I was noticing that earlier. I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you did. So when it comes to
the
NASA,
new t-shirt, it's got a flat earth right here. It's the flat earth map.
Oh, nice. Right on.
So it's a contradiction.
The first one had the moon in the background.
Yeah.
Nice.
Right. That was when I was
moving along with the times. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, man, getting with the program. Yeah, and I wasn't really ready to admit that I was a flat earther until I had Dave on most recently. I was like, I guess I can lump myself in with this crazy fella. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But here's the thing about shape, though, and I kind of went over this with him a little bit. This is way off of any other. I mean, flat earth is off of all topics. It's the daddy, like I was saying, the daddy of crazy deception.
People just want to hate it. They don't even want to look at it. They just want to hate it instantly.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that people are being more open-minded. Like I was flat smacking a couple of friends of mine last night, and I had sent them a video. It was the 7-hour video, the EWARNN.
Oh yeah.
And
they're like history of flat earth.
Yeah.
And, volume 2. And
one of the girls, she was like, yeah, I'm like 3 hours into that movie. I'm going to listen to it after we leave.
That's awesome.
So I'm just
it brings
like
up
their
so many. Yeah. It brings up so many valid questions, I mean, I honestly, I wonder, have you seen his newer videos? He's got a couple that have come out. And I understand where he's coming from, and Matt did an awesome follow up on his show about these kind of changes in Iwarnon's kind of modus operandi. Right?
You know what I think? I think whoever did those videos, they found him, offered him some money to retract all those statements, because that retraction is not genuine. He's not very specific. He generalizes his findings, and so it doesn't really match up with his original discoveries. And so it just seems like a quick run through of like, oh, I was wrong, and some of these buildings weren't exactly built when these were built sooner.
Yeah, well, and he also keeps going on this. It's best not to make sweeping generalizations, right? And I think he's right. There's that one part of those newer couple. He keeps hammering on that point. Don't make those vast kind of generalizations to everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm with him on that. And I think a lot of people have when it comes to the mud flood, right? Like, oh, this was a worldwide event, right? People want to think about it a certain way, an act of God, something crazy like that. They don't want to think of, however, is if this was people strip mining everything, hydraulic mining everything with the power of airships and other technology, just gutting everything that used to be here, these mythical cities of gold like Shilaga or Chicago, right? We have tales of these cities of gold for a reason, because they existed, right? So what happens is after they get these giants out, or the giants leave, or the giants team up with the controller overlords, and who knows what the dynamic is there, because there are pictures of giants with the hidden Masonic hand hanging out with littler people. So it's like, but the optics of that are pretty clear. But then why do we even have those pictures unless it's just for the optics of seeing that giant with his hand hidden? You know what I mean? So
well, they make it seem like it's like a rare occurrence, that it's just he's just a freak,
Right. But then all of the ones, they're all dressed the same, hanging out with like dressed people, and always with that one hidden hand under the breast coat,
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so these giants know what's going on. And you know what I mean? Just as well as these people with their hidden hands standing next to him posing for this picture, all circa like 1880, 1850. So like they're building a narrative right there. And the narrative they've built around giants doesn't quite fit, that it's a genetic disease, and that it's like 1 in a million, when right around that time period you have this kind of clustering of all different races of giants. First of all, they weren't just
it was very
one race.
common in China.
And you had African giants, you had all different races. So that's suggestive of entire populations,
right,
of that specific race of giant. Like that's not just a few giants, like we're kind of taught in fairy tales. It was like there was 2 giants, no, there was probably several million at one point, maybe, giants. And they were the ones that kind of held lordship over whatever was here before, would be my guess. You have tales of the Indians, in America, battling with these giants, for like several hundred years from what they say. And these giants, supposedly based on tales, some of them were cannibals maybe, but they were all red-headed giants.
Yeah.
So
one of my theories is that humans have been genetically modified. And we had that whole period of during the expositions, they displayed all the baby incubators and what they were doing, because they were doing this same exact thing in Australia. Because I've heard other stories from other people that have different shows, and there's evidence that they were incubating babies in Australia, and they were creating this whole race of children that grew up to dig out the old structures. And then they surrounded the cities with them, built these cities just like they did here in the West, and once these kids were old enough, they went to the expositions and they finalized their education. They got their booklet and they had to go through each class, so they didn't just go for a couple of days. They went for like 2 weeks minimum. And then each day they had to go through different courses, and every day. And so they would teach them like different race, and they have all these exhibits of like these native savages in
right
habitats.
The most bigoted type of generalizations ever, for
so
sure.
They learned everything about the world, and they were being programmed like hardcore programming.
No doubt. Not to mention, and not just these kids that were kind of going through there. And see, they felt very fortunate because they got to go and mingle with the rich folk, you know what I mean, who were kind of gifted their, transit to and from these places and different things. Mm-hmm. But they were getting to mingle with sophisticated, folk. And these were just basically worker slaves.
Right.
You know what I mean? When you look at the upbringing in these orphanages, workhouses, they're digging nonstop. What I always found interesting is when you look at old movies about prison, they're always breaking rocks, right? Mm-hmm. And that never really made much sense to me until I started looking at the old world situation and the amount of old world buildings that would have been here in America would have necessitated a place to just sit and break them apart all day to create the aggregates that we see on our roadways and gravel in our garden and whatever else, right? Like all this aggregate is created by crushing stone. So that means that you have some big stone somewhere, and it's all the same kind of like white quartzy kind of marbly kind of run of the mill gravel. You go to your hardware store, you will find that same white stone, gravel that is
Yeah.
everywhere, and every city has a golf course right next to an aggregate plant. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
it's this weird thing. Michelle Gibson goes off on an awesome tangent about that whole tie-in with,
Well, these big parks are hiding something.
oh yes, yeah, parks, national parks, golf courses, sometimes like a lot of the newer housing kind of complexes, these newer track homes and things. Like, there's reasons a lot of this land was developed,
Mhm.
was to kind of keep anybody from digging on it. Basically.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why a lot of the land is forested or reforested. I challenge you to find, in America, especially in the US, try to find a tree that's more than a couple of 100 years old. Aside from maybe some of those sequoia, but you can't. So and see, like that, a lot of people want to call that kind of their reasoning behind this massive reset kind of theory, that everything was wiped out. It was like, oh, you don't have trees, there's no vegetation, there's all this mud. But if you had like an implemented system that was using metal in some way to conduct electricity, it ran throughout all of these older structures and older cities, and you wanted to get rid of it and kind of collect all of the materials, the raw materials, the steel, the copper, the gold, the place would have been rich with it. Maybe the fastest way would be to just destroy it and, then basically take the stuff you can use out of there.
Yeah.
And then you got these orphans, these kids to do it for you, who they are not going to ask questions. They're just grateful to have anything, because most of us are, really, when we're younger, even as we get a little older, most of us are grateful just to be around, just to exist. And most people are generally goodwill to each other and are open to suggestion. I don't know if it's because we're homunculus and we're bred that way, you know what I mean? To be very impressionable at younger ages and super ornery when we get older, like just kind of cement in. And they know this, right? That's why the Prussian school system that we all grew up a part of has just, man, done its job to the T, for sure.
Yeah. So do you go around like around town and stuff and look for evidence of like mud structures, like the lower levels? Because I don't know if you've ever seen that episode that Michelle put out where it was like a string of tours that went in the underground cities and around all over the country.
They have some. I know of the most famous one is in Seattle, where you can go tour like kind of the underground.
Yeah.
And yeah, really, it's just another layer. You know what I mean? It's very strange how it attaches to the buildings that are now what's upstairs, right? Like you go down and it's all red bricked in basements, some doors and pathways leading to kind of like nowhere. So
yeah.
And see, unfortunately, there are no photographs of what things looked like prior to 1600, but there are some etchings. And there's some that Iwaranon brings up in his video of this town hall in Switzerland or something like that. But anyway, there are a lot of etchings of buildings that clearly show another 20 to 30 feet of building above ground, right? Yeah. All the whole complex underneath the Russian Kremlin. There's etchings of that, and you could see the entire like superstructure all the way down. And right now you only see the top maybe third of it. Right. Whereas maybe in the past you had another almost 2/3 below, and then you had this like series of channels and canals and things dug around. So I mean, everything was irrigated to a T. Mm-hmm. Everything was, in my opinion, was exactly like you see in the older etchings that show all this fine, stone temple type palaces and cities, bastion forts, star forts. Sorry about that. That's but right. Yeah, so you see a lot of this stonework and all of this stuff, and you see the same kind of like attention to detail in these underground places, I guess is what I'm saying. and you can go on tours. I don't know if they probably have shut down a lot of those tours after COVID or what, but you know how that goes. The whole, if you're a kind of a mom and pop type of deal and you're not, you know, in with the club, most of them are shut down, I'm sure. Unless you're requiring a QR code. I don't know, maybe you can still get by. I don't know how it works anymore. I don't go out into society too much anymore. I'm in the Midwest, so I don't have to worry about it. It's like 10 years different out here. When I came out from like Los Angeles, it was like getting in a time machine and going 10 years back. So, you know, if you're a listener and you're in New York or Los Angeles, just imagine 10 years ago. And that's about where I'm sitting in the Midwest.
Yeah, I've just been really fascinated with like structures, like even today I just found this like church and it looks super old. And you know, my wife and I we get really fascinated and we're always looking at architecture. Like I don't know if you can see that, but
man, there's, and that type of architecture is everywhere, every town center. I mean, almost without fail.
I'm gonna look it up.
It's crazy. I mean, literally look up just any random town in the Midwest. They all have a courthouse that looks exactly like the building you just showed me.
Mm-hmm.
They will have several churches in the surrounding area, some of which look very, very old. One church nearby in a town nearby where I'm at has these remnants of flying buttresses. Are you familiar with that that aspect of architecture? It's kind of a strand that reaches out, almost like one would imagine cables holding up something.
Yeah.
But it's called a flying buttress. And, you know, personally, I think that maybe it had something to do with the conductivity of the building or the diversion of energy. Not 100% sure. Because of course, I don't know what was connected to the building to make all this function, you know, where the battery source was and so on. But, it had these kind of remnants off to the side of these kind of flying buttresses. It was this weird kind of haphazard brickwork built up around it, you know, which looked odd. And so I'm looking at old churches with kind of an eye for detail now. Like, is that window over bricked in? You know, I see a lot of this, like where you'll have a very deep seated window, you know, and it's just a regular single panel glass window. So why is it seated so deep? Like within the brickwork, what's going on there? You know, why are the walls so thick? And I think that a lot of it was kind of a rebuild or a cover up of some of the things that maybe were here. And people get kind of touchy about the whole whether buildings and things were here or not. Like, was it from a previous civilization? You know, personally, I think that civilization that occupied these places that were from quote unquote before. I think that these people were just like you and me. These were just your average townsfolk. We just, by we, I mean the controller society group that stomped everything out and took it over. And so when they took everything over, they sent everybody who didn't fall in line, or folks that maybe lived on this land or lived in these towns, and they sent them to these asylums and they just left them there. Meanwhile, they just brought new people from Europe or from New York City or the slums or wherever, or incubators, which came from test tubes. That's an idea that I'm gotta say, it seems more and more likely that we just popped up out of nowhere and had to have everything written, you know what I mean, for us, because there was, who knows, maybe several thousand years of desolation on this planet, right? There's evidence of ancient war, maybe not so ancient, you know, in my opinion. Maybe a lot of the devastation that we see just had been sitting there for a while. You know what I mean? Maybe it was under a giant sheet of ice for 5,000 to 7,000 years and finally thawed out over the last 1,000.
I mean, it's possible.
Right. And then we just kind of show up out of nowhere. Everything is kind of written starting at a certain point, right around the 1400s, a little before, maybe 200 years before or after. But then anything aside from that, we have these like kind of very structured, stereotypical tales of the several thousand years leading up to that they overlap a lot. There's a lot of duplications in the periods of certain kings' reign, or so there's a lot of this weird fabrication and patching up of histories and stories and all different corresponding things with that, having that, like I was talking about earlier, that second or that first-hand account, right? So a lot of time has gone into, I dare say, forging corroboration for a lot of stories and situations. Even the signatures of most past presidents prior to probably like World War I can't be verified by like a living person that was actually written by them. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of ghost writing going on, a lot of weird things happening with everything. All history is being rewritten right around this time. So it's like, I find that so intriguing that, man, that first of all, that you can get to a point where you have to rewrite history because you've taken over something that was so substantial, because whatever was here before, whatever this city-state system or, free lands or whatever it looked like prior to this new involvement was definitely, man, apparently worth fighting for to the last man until you end up with your last good people in an asylum. That speaks to me of a major conflict for a very long time, and that these people didn't just suddenly rapture and disappear, And I think that as much as, I would like a very neat and easy kind of answer to what happened to these previous kind of civilization or these people.
It's not going to be easy because they're constantly deleting history. Like, I tried looking up like when the US Capitol was built, and you can find construction, but there was also a fire. Wasn't there a fire in like 1812?
yeah. So, it's all over the place, and there's always a fire. You will find this out when you start looking into history, especially architecture. Okay, architecture tells stories, right, about the time period it was built in. There's a reason a lot of this stuff has been destroyed, because I don't know if it's a genetic or like a soul tie kind of memory thing that happens when you see something. You can, if you have learned to kind of use this part of you, you can feel the depth of a certain building or a certain object if you allow yourself to. I'm not saying I'm like some guru at anything or anything like that, but if I see something that's out of place, like some bricked over flying buttress halves on this church in the, in the town, that just doesn't make sense for where it's sitting on the street and everything else, it makes me think. I'm not saying I got all the answers, but just the devastation of this entire grouping, putting them in asylums. I mean, it had to be tons and tons of people in order to warrant giving these massive complexes that these asylums are on to the care of these, infirm or whatever, right? They gave them all these weird titles. And some of the things that they would admit people to these asylums for or like as simple as like a woman being disagreeable. You know what I mean? It's or a man essentially thinking too much, overthinking, I think was another one. So
these asylums are huge. I mean, they
massive.
house 300-400, sometimes 1,000 people. And you're like, why would you need an insane asylum for that many people? Or were that many people crazy in Utah, in the middle of nowhere? You have one asylum that covered a stretch of like,
right. And it was like one of the first buildings or the first things built in all of Salt Lake. Yeah. That you had, they don't even have
the population to even fill that building, let alone have a building that needs that many people.
Yep. And then they were like, well, we've got to figure out some way to kind of water down the populace. All we have is people in these asylums. So then they start
the entire
creating
population
kids.
is in that building.
Right. So we got to create some kids in an underground bunker, and you know what I mean? Sell them on the boardwalk. And so they did. Like, the stuff sounds crazy when you say it like this, but how else are you going to get that many babies in incubators of such a small size? right?
Mhm.
Unless you have some type of a farm mechanism, whether it's
Yeah.
pregnant ladies. I don't like to think about that. I'd rather they come from test tubes. Unfortunately, I'd rather they come full on experimental form, out of like some kind of a weird bottle or something. But who knows what the mechanism was? All that we know is there was a ton of kids in a very short period of time, especially for that time period, right? Because like everything we're kind of told about that time period is it was not like the greatest time to live. There was a lot of hardship, blah, blah, blah. So why would all these people be having children? You know what I mean? And unless perhaps it was something quite the contrary and it was a great time to live. Technology was amazing. There was a system of essentially rule and ownership that everybody kind of benefited from. And this is kind of pie in the sky thinking, to think that humans have had a society that functioned at one point. But I mean, this society did function well enough to create these people that wouldn't budge on their ideals and would have to be locked up in asylums, or pretty much have to be killed. And all of the whole War of 1812, Civil War, all of these French Indian American, Mexican American, you know what I mean? All these different wars taking place around this time, that, in my opinion, just based on what I'm seeing, the patterns that I've seen, is that was all one big thing. This was all,
they were
smaller.
resetting the population because it was getting out of control. Because one of my students came up to me a couple of weeks ago and she said she wanted to do a research paper on the spinning jenny. I was like, oh, I hadn't even heard of the spinning jenny. So I started looking it up with her. And, I was like trying to find an angle that was interesting. And all of a sudden I discovered that the spinning jenny caused like this whole industrial collapse. Everybody was making garments from their home. And all of a sudden this machine was, one machine with 8 spindles could do the work of 8 women instead of one person. And so it caused this whole collapse of this textile industry. And so all these people had to move into the city, and they were poor. They were dirt poor. And during that time, the only this poverty system, this economic support system, is that these people had to live in work homes and they had to be separated from their children. And so these children, if they were over the age of 7, they would be sent to this orphanage. And then once they reached the age of 9, then they were able to work. And so they work like slaves. So there was this whole population of children who were doing adult labor, and the population was just so dense in these cities that they had to get rid of them. So once they were old enough, they had this they were constantly having wars just to get rid of the populations. And so I'm thinking that part of that population, they were sending them off in these orphan trains and sending them out west.
Right. For sure. There's definitely a mix of, all different types of kids, different age groups. But what's kind of like the most alarming is the very tiny infants.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
These preemie babies.
Right. And just, the infrastructure that would kind of allow you to take care of that many infants kind of suggests that you knew these infants were coming, and you built the infrastructure up in order to have places for all, for all of this. It shows a high level of attention to detail and planning, and then when you have these things spread out around the country, around even parts of the world, I think they even had infantoriums probably in Paris and some of the expositions and kind of the higher caliber areas of society, wherever they were putting this new face right out to all these people. And, when you start looking at like classic novels and the way that sometimes they'll kind of discuss a previous era, a beautiful time, right? With nostalgia, oftentimes they'll refer to this kind of time before.
Yeah, for the rich.
Right. And I think that's spot on. I think that when people are deluding themselves into believing that there was this kind of this self-sustaining, just network of humans that was being cognizant and aware of each other, and it was all love and peace and everything else. I think that that's maybe taking it too far, but I do think that just like now, there was a large element of people that were peaceful and, were family people, were just going through their experience, learning what they're here to learn, and, doing their thing. And then like somewhere along the line, a certain volume or something of maniacal people kind of got together and realized that when they kind of flex their their mania together, that things happen and stuff starts shifting, and I think a lot of that kind of comes from this, what we're taught of as the mystery schools, the Atlantean mystery schools. If you've read like any Manly P. Hall and like Secret Teachings, he kind of disseminates all the different schools of thought, breaks them all down, and they're all a smaller and a smaller branch on the tree, right?
Yeah.
All these different belief systems and understanding nodes on this roots of this tree, and they're all so specific and so segregated from each other that basically, unless you take a step back and look at all the secret teaching kind of schools and say, okay, put them all together and make them personal, you're never going to know what's going on with the whole bigger scheme of anything. And it's kind of like that with secret societies too. They're compartmentalized, around. You have the Masonic lodges, which is essentially, it's not so much the building of buildings, the Freemasonic lodge anyway. It's not like the Masonics or the builders of previous eras, but you have these lodges that are essentially there to build the social infrastructure. You know what I mean? They're the builders of what we would consider infrastructure for us nowadays, and they do an okay job at having that stuff in place, schools and so on.
Constructing the mind.
Right. Yeah. They're government, they're governing your mind, or the mente. And, and they do a fantastic job, man. I mean, they've still got me hook, line, and sinker when it comes to everything. I mean, everything. For me to even pay attention or pay any mind to anything going on that is shown on media or put through Hollywood, just every time I sit down and watch a movie, I'm like, man, they got me again. Every time I sit down and partake in a GMO food product, man, they got me again. Like I'm, and we're all kind of, to a certain extent, kind of guilty of giving up our piece of power. But I think that comes on the tail of a vicious kind of all out, all for nothing, or all for almost, I guess, all for naught kind of struggle between.
Yeah. Well, I can't give up a good glass of whiskey,
Right. Well, and dude, like, I don't know if I'm ready to give up watching anime, or, having the internet and, all of the comforts that I have in this world, just to be. And see, that's the thing. A lot of people will find it like an area of, I can be social justice warrior and, you know what I mean, make change and this and that. But it's like, well, realistically, you can go out and preach on a pulpit and do all this stuff. But who are you doing that for at the end of the day? Are you doing that for like your own kind of ego, or, you know what I mean? Like, what's
those
going
people
on there?
don't attract any new followers. You
Or
sit on the side,
processes, right? Like
you sit on the corner.
Thoughts.
Have you ever wondered, like, those people who have those speaker systems and they're preaching to the masses? Do you think they ever attract one follower a day?
I'm not sure, but
I can't imagine they would.
I do think that that there's a lot to be said about the intention of what they're doing. I don't think that like physically, directly, that they attract, really anything aside from maybe their own energy by putting that stuff out there. I'm guessing they get some form of gratification or clarification.
But do you ever feel like what we do?
Oh, absolutely.
Like
yeah, absolutely. For sure.
We're just preaching to the choir.
Yeah. And you know what? It's okay though, because it's a step further than where I was last year when I didn't know there was a choir, right? I thought I was singing alone. And, so I'm looking forward to like the next year, finding out a few more awesome things, like bouncing it off of each other, hey, what's going on with this? Well, here's what I think. What do you think? And then like I don't know, I feel like if we all genuinely consider each other's input, like genuinely from a place of like humility, maybe we can get to where we have a better understanding within maybe the next few years instead of the next couple of decades, right?
I mean,
but like
these shows have inspired me to do my own research because I don't want to just assume that what you tell me is the truth.
Right. It's so complicated too. There's so much to all of it, man. Space. There's so much just to that, right? Just to that whole scenario.
If I watch a video,
right?
If I watch a video, I'll do a screenshot and then I'll look it up and then I'll verify it for myself. Then I'm like, oh shit, this is real. Or like, like the Iranian, like he was like, told me to look up the buildings in my area, and I was looking up every freaking building, and it was like a needle in the haystack trying to find something that went past beyond the founded date.
Yeah, it's very strange, and then you start seeing the way that things were established echoing, right? Like the time periods where a lot of these places were established, the way that that certain buildings came into existence. One of which, it was in, I think it's in Chicago. It's the old water tower in Chicago. And I think it's still there today. So there's a lot of like back and forth of how that building came to be. There's nothing, can't really pin it down to actually being built, and there's a lot of that happens. When I went to recently the courthouse right here up the street from me, in the lobby, they have a picture, and it's a schematic. It's a hand-drawn, to scale schematic of the front of the building. But you could struggle with this. There are different types of blueprints, and there's all kinds of stipulations to the whole, well, how can we never see legitimate building schematics for these buildings? We see the architectural art.
They're always burning fires.
Right. But, and we see this artwork that's done from the outside. There's a ton of, literary or archival information on architecture accents and different styles of accents, pillars. Like, I mean, and this goes, and they're usually lumped into like 2 or 3 different French architects, 2 or 3 different Italian ones, and they'll have this kind of portfolio of different aspects of architecture. But what it looks like to me, I could be a layman for all I know, who knows? What it looks like to me is that these people were drawing based on what they were seeing. It's not that they were imagining, hey, this is, a Romanesque style column with such and such design. No, they were drawing this, standing there looking at this thing and drawing it before it got destroyed. And now they have these compilation of all these different accents and different styles from the past. And then they were listed as the creator of that style. You know what I mean? Like, and this is usually happening right around 16 to maybe 1750 was kind of the establishing of, who they were going to say built this stuff that they had planned to get taken over or to get reused. So it's crazy. And then like, once you can spot just how the story was built, you can kind of pick it apart a little and go, well, is there anything to corroborate this other than what is handed over in this neat little package? You know what I mean? Like, this neat little package about this architect encompasses something like 2 or 3 different cities worth of, worth of buildings he supposedly had a part in. And, they never go on about the contractor. There's never anything about the contractor, only about the architect. And last time I checked, most architects don't actually construct the building. So, I want a little bit more information on that.
Well, just like the architecture, the architect that designed the 1893 World's Fair, he had no prior experience in any construction at all.
Right. Yeah. And, even if these buildings were made of wood frame with plaster, 700 acres, of buildings, and most of it was built out. It wasn't 700 acres with a few houses or a few little buildings. These things were massive.
And how many people visited that area, that exhibition in that 6-month period, how many millions of people?
I want to say 25,
20 million, between
it
20
was
and
a
25.
lot. Yeah, it was more than I realized kind of existed even at that point, to be honest.
It's like, where did 20 million people come from?
And when we think of it, and we're taught about, the Wild West and things like that. We've painted ourselves into a corner with the picture we've been handed, and I think that's why so many people are so quick to defend their old story, is because, dude, we've been getting hit with this from the time I was like an infant playing with, cowboy versus Indian army men, what I mean? So we've had this certain way things have happened hammered into us, what I mean? From the get-go. And this has gone back several generations. So we can't look at our parents and go, oh, it's your fault, Dad. You never taught me what was going on in the world. Well, your dad didn't know either. Neither did his dad or his dad before him. You know what I mean? We've all kind of been born into this. And it seems like maybe, I don't know, don't quote me on this, but we might be some of the first generation to actually kind of see it, see everything for what it is.
True. Because information was limited for everyone that preceded us.
Yeah, it's so crazy. And, a lot of people like, or I like to feel like we're using, the tools at our disposal to do essentially, the Lord's work and disseminate knowledge and things. But then I look at like the expert kind of degree with which they've constructed this last narrative. And it took all of this computing power and people power, mind, energy, focus to start picking it apart. Right. So like, what are we being manipulated in a crazy grander scale into creating and fashioning the new narrative that Klaus Schwab talks about and all that, right? Are we actually fashioning the new past, the new history for these people inadvertently?
Yeah.
I kind of wonder a lot about that, especially when he's like, oh, we feel write the new narrative, how he goes, and he goes on and on. And I'm like, dude, I wonder if we're doing it for him. Like, are we doing this guy's work? And Bill Gates is just sitting over there like, just like rolling his fingers and, oh man, just loving it because he's got all these Zoom calls with all this juicy stuff on what might make an interesting past, and so like later on, after all the monkeys take us out or whatever happens, Planet of the Apes, goes on. I don't even know, man. It's so crazy.
Oh man. One of the things I wanted to bring up to you was the Baker Hotel. If you've ever heard of that, it's in Mineral Wells, Texas. I love Texas. I've been discovering so much old like architecture and like just crazy stuff. But the Baker Hotel, it's under renovation right now. And there's this guy, he's got this social media account, and I have to look it up. I'm going to have to post a video because his discovery is kind of confirms some of the old tech. And the building was, it was built in the after 1900, but I looked up in the Texas Almanac, and there was an auditorium there that was built between 1851 and 1863. So where the same location of that hotel was another building. And that building, he said that he had to rewire the entire system to be able to connect to the power grid, because the Baker Hotel had its own power grid. It sustained its own power source. And he's like, these walls are like nothing I've ever seen. And then he showed like bits of like copper wire and whatever iron and all these like conductive material.
Right, like embedded within the structure itself.
Yes.
It's wild.
Yeah, it was like totally wild. And that's another thing. The notoriums were like famous all over the country in the mid 1800s. And so they were all connected to natural mineral springs. And if you looked up anything about the mineral springs in like England and Italy, they were magnesium mineral springs. So they would take mineral baths, and it would but giant pools. They could fit like 1,000 people. And what these pools would do is they were healing centers. So you would go in the pool and it would just suck all the toxins out of your body, and you would feel revived. And they completely did away with that in like the mid 1900s, around the 1930s. They just dilapidated all of them. And so we don't have that resource anymore. You have to go to the natural spring, which are very difficult to find.
Yeah, and if you're able to find one that still exists and is like unadulterated, you're going to pay, you're going to pay for the luxury to use it.
Right.
There's a lot of right, exactly. And man, it's so sad to look at that. So there were certain things that obviously in the past maybe were more collectively kind of available, but after looking further back into it and seeing star forts, right, and thinking about like the kind of social dynamic that would entail, everything being kind of contained within the walls, having at the peak or in the center, some kind of, most likely the governor's house or something, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I'm sure that it was a very different situation with what was within city walls and what was outside. Tales of crazy beasts and dogmen, and I mean, you name it. Like, there's tales of it out there back in what we would call Starfort times. There's etchings of all kinds of weird stuff, Bigfoot type people, walking around carrying scrolls. So, like, apparently Bigfoot can write and read. So, just for everyone out there, like, give Bigfoot a chance. Come on, but
I used to love George Norrie in Coast to Coast, and they would always have those kind of stories.
Oh yeah, I love it, dude. Yeah, that's one of the things that got me started was Coast to Coast AM. Man, listening to people's abduction stories and people hearing the trumpets of Babylon in the middle of the night in Arkansas, and like all kinds of weird stuff, all kinds of crazy stuff.
There's so many stories of shadow people that you would think that you would know someone that experienced it.
yeah. And then you find out later in life that you do know people that have experienced it, and you're like, wow, I don't know if that's a real thing anymore. Those people are crazy, but then it happens to you and you're like, oh, they got me.
Yeah, I've met people who've experienced Bigfoot, and I'm still like on the fence about that whole thing.
I want to, but I mean, I had an experience with lights in the sky, UAP, UFO, whatever. And the thing is like, I feel like to some degree I wanted to have that experience, so I did. I anticipated like I was going to have that experience. Like, there's no doubt about it. When I went out there, that's what I was going to do. And so like, if that can happen, and here's like kind of the toss up on the alien thing. All right, does that mean they can read my minds and put lights in the sky at their own whim, or is it something simpler, like there's some kind of little thing in my cell phone when I played that C5 site or whatever, they zeroed in with their satellites that are floating in space, remember? So see, space has to be possible for that to work, for the whole like mass surveillance from satellites, Project Bluebeam, putting lights in the sky above you, even if you're just a random nobody in the Midwest one night. Well,
even Crow 777's videos, and when he was showing the lunar wave, I mean, there's these unidentified objects flying around the moon, and it trips me out. I don't know what it is. Nobody knows what it is.
Yeah, it's thing. I'm no closer to knowing, even though I had an experience with lights in the sky. All that did was probably confuse me even more.
But they were always in groups of threes, if you notice, these crafts. And then when I experienced the lights, I was driving home, and it was like really late at night. It was like 1 a.m. There was no traffic around me, and I saw a V shape of like 5 lights, and it was just perfectly following me. And I thought it was a reflection. Then I looked behind me and there was nothing. And then I looked back up and I'm like, oh shit, that looks like a spacecraft. And then I looked again, and then it took off, and it was like as quick as I looked at it.
That's crazy. Yeah, see, I've never seen the angular craft. I saw one. This was some time ago. This was like, probably in like 2012 or so. It was like three lights, like you're saying, kind of like three points of light that kind of somehow merged together to form a crescent shape, and then they merged into one point of light and then disappeared. So that was kind of a weird thing to see happen. That was one that could probably be explained as like swamp gas or something. but like I was new to the Midwest, I didn't know what was going on, and I even posted on MUFON on the UFO network, and they never said anything back about it. I just wonder if other people had seen the same thing, which is why I posted it on there. But yeah, man. So hopefully soon I'll look into more trying to call aliens down and interact with them once I get kind of the cojones up for it. I'm not quite prepared to be like, yeah, I want to have like a face-to-face alien encounter, because there's a good chance it might happen. You know what I mean? So I'm like on the fence about wanting to will that to actually happen or not. It was cool seeing lights in the sky, but I don't know about any further than that. I don't know if I want to sit face to face in a spaceship with some other entity.
I mean, I do think to an extent that we have the capability of developing that technology, and we're hiding it from the public. I mean, it's not absurd to think that that's possible. And if there is extra territory outside of this realm, I mean, and it's parallel, and this realm is all flat, I mean, it's possible it could just be coming from another part of whatever we live on,
Right. Yeah, for sure. And we only see a very limited wavelength of anything that's going on. We only touch a certain frequency, you know what I mean? So our interaction is so very limited. I think a lot of people forget that. You know what I mean? Like even a bumblebee can see ultraviolet and other bandwidths that you can't. Even a dog can hear things that you can't and sense things that you can't. But also, even a child can sense things that you have learned not to.
And right? we're fed so much propaganda, with like Disney and Hollywood movies that, like my whole life, I just loved space and fantasy and
absolutely.
Star Wars, and Battlestar Galactica,
Yes.
That it's altered my perception of reality, thinking that space is a real thing and it's possible to travel at light speed and go to distant galaxies. But, it's just like telling us the whole story of how the sun is just flying 1.3 million miles an hour.
It's all madness, dude. And
there's no way we can prove that.
If more people had pushed, like if there was a bigger push for people to get into photography and learn like the science of optics, we wouldn't have the problem we have now. Like all camera people, right, are absorbed by the Hollywood machine, by the entertainment machine. So anybody that puts their head behind a camera and formats their work, their art in photography, they're bought by the system already. And they're the ones that would know, based on perspective and point of view, what the situation is with the sunlight coming through the clouds and things like this. So there are certain things that you can use your eyes and see just to see that something doesn't make sense. And so all of these photographers that understand this, they're all backing the system that that is wanting to have nothing to do with this fact coming out. We're in a plasma circuit. We're in a circuit. All right. This is an electrical circuit that we're a part of. And we all, even us little people down here, humans, this little fractal of a soul down here, we are playing a part because there's always a macro and there's always a micro, and it goes infinite, both ways. So we're playing a part for those things that are significantly larger than our scale can understand. And, they are playing a part for other things we don't understand. This can be the overlap of like spirits and, ghosts and things like this. Or that could all just be wavelengths that we don't have the equipment to see and interact with. I think maybe both are likely, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about getting abducted by aliens, man. I'm still on the fence about that. So
Well,
I'm like,
if
I
any of
want to
those
see
movies,
one, I want to interact. Like, I want to sit face to face and be like, hey, so what's the story? But I always feel like if I asked, like, oh, so what's the point of all this? I feel like the answer that I would get back would be, well, you already know what the point of it is. And then I would have to go back through all of the things that I think might be the reason for life and pick one. And then I'd be like, oh, I still get to pick one, dude. You're supposed to tell me.
yeah.
I don't think that they come out and tell you what the meaning of your existence is. I think you got to figure that out for yourself.
I mean, the whole push for aliens, like this, I mean, it's been in the news quite a bit lately. And I feel like it's just another weapon in their arsenal that they're just trying to get us away from God and
the further you
creator.
go from yourself, and some people kind of frown on this outlook, but I mean, even in the Bible, Jesus says about your temple is your heart. You know what I mean?
I believe that
The connection to God is within, right?
Yes.
And so we are so distracted with carnal pleasures and entertainment galore, right? Government. So we've got the two things, the governing and the entertaining of our minds right there. So we've got it all. And the more we kind of eat from that or drink from that cup, the further we get from ourselves, and then we're disconnected from God. Because God is in, man, it's so simple, but it's so vast. Like, God is in love and everything that lightens. You know what I mean? And it's not necessarily the shade of light or the shade of dark. It's kind of, it comes from an emotional place. So we don't have the words in our English language, and in most languages, we don't have the words to kind of describe positive emotion and positive spirituality. We have a lot of words for evil and demon and all this, but we only have like angels and God. That's the two things on the light side.
That's another thing. They're constantly changing the meanings of words. So it's taking away the power that we can harness with those words. They're constantly changing the definitions. I was trying to tell my friend how, in the Black community, they were pushing the Ebonics language, and how the reason why they're doing that is because they're taking away the power from words from your, from the Black community. It's like, don't adopt that language, because you're ridding yourself of that power that's within you.
Yeah.
You manifest things through speaking. And so if you're speaking a broken language, then you're going to have broken power. It's worthless.
Well, that's exactly what English is. That's what every language we are handed is. They're all broken languages, and always the removing of words, changing of meanings. When you change a meaning of something and make somebody doubt in their own head that they are able to express that meaning with that word, just by putting that little piece of doubt in there, maybe this doesn't mean this, just breaks the magic of that word. It breaks the intention.
Exactly.
I used to think it was just fairy tales and talking about magic and things like this. But then after seeing kind of how my own life has been manipulated by words, how my own, intention and my own direction has been kind of like toyed with based on semantics, is mind blowing. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
all you have to do is just look outside your door and look at society, and you hear how they're speaking to one another. And if that language is a broken dialect, it's just like, in the Latin communities and, the more impoverished communities, their languages are so far removed from its original dialect that's why they're impoverished the way they are, because it's so far removed from the original language that they've lost that power.
Yeah, definitely. That along with the changing of the names of deities, right? The changing of the explanations of where this intent of prayer is kind of going, turning Yeshua into Jesus and all of these other things, and possibly even from Ra to that. So like you're constantly shifting a people's intention to achieve a certain result. I would imagine, you know, I don't know, but and when you have people focusing their attention on certain things, I don't know if it's like a lot of people believe that there's like lizard people feeding on our loosh, right? Or if it's more of a dimensional type of thing. Like as we are able to create certain types of energy, there must therefore be something that consumes or gets rid of that energy for there to be balance.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I'm at. And maybe possibly with aliens and stuff too, there's this balance thing going on where you have, you know, the loosh sucking lizard men, but then you also have maybe you have the, you know, the light workers on the other side. I don't know. I like to hope so. You know, I like to hope that there are other species. I don't think it would be so cool to be the only thing, but based on the giant cover up, I think there's definitely more species out there, at a minimum, larger people. And I think Bigfoot is a real possibility too, especially seeing him in like etchings from medieval times. And apparently he was a part of society back then. Now he's just kind of ostracized and left out there in the wild. So
yeah. Well, Randy, it's already been 2 hours.
Oh man, went all over the place, dude. I love it though. I appreciate you jabbering with me, dude.
This was so a lot of fun. Yeah.
And there's so much, man. And I just so hope that I can empower one person to go and have a conversation like this. You know, at first, man, I totally felt like, what am I doing? Like, hit reset and re-record and everything else. And then it gets to a point where it's like, wow, like I'm constantly learning something from every conversation I have. Getting a unique perspective every single time. It doesn't matter who I talk to. I'm always able to kind of walk away and take something that helps fit some of my little puzzle piece in, you know, even if I don't realize it today, right? Like maybe I go back and listen to this a few months down the line and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that thought, and then revisit that thought. So yeah, man, I hope that everybody out there can revisit those thoughts, you know what I mean? And find that joy in discovery. Even if your discovery leads you to kind of a dark place where you're like, well, what do I do with this? Just hold on to that for you, man. Shine. You know what I mean? Do the best you can to shine.
That's part of why I do this, is just to be able to talk to somebody, because, you know, I'm surrounded by blue pillars and just people who are just walking zombies. And you try to introduce anything and they're just like, oh, why? Where'd you get that information from? What source? You know, and then they want to hear something mainstream.
Oh man, it's like, what a miserable existence. And I don't know. I think that's why I never felt at home existing that way. You know, and I always felt closer to fiction than I did to what was portrayed as history or truth. Always felt closer to like,
we're living a fiction and going into a fiction to escape fiction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just that fractal layer, baby. Gotta love it. It's been an absolute pleasure, man. Thank you so much for humoring me and for finally getting with me. And man, I definitely hope to catch you. I've been taking a little kind of hiatus lately, working too much, but I'm looking to pull myself out of that here real soon. Try to get some stuff lined up for all the folks out there.
That's what I went through the last 6 months. That's why I hadn't been doing any shows. I was under a lot of stress and I couldn't find time to do this. And, you know, then real life gets in the way and you have all these responsibilities and they're like, shit, what am I going to, I can't do a show.
Yeah. But then you kind of rekindle your passion for wanting to, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember what how much fun that was to meet people and talk to people. But then there are those days where it's like, I'm having a case of the Mondays. I'm not.
and another thing, I feel like I've matured. I've done a lot of research when I haven't been doing shows. I just been compiling so much research. I've been reading a lot, and then I think it's just strengthening my memory, you know, by reading and doing a lot of that research.
Oh yeah, definitely. It adds to your bigger personal truth kind of picture, you know, and I think that's important for everybody. Not to worry about, does my personal truth match with somebody else's, but to like completely own and be in your personal truth.
I used to worry what other people would say. Now I don't care, you know?
And that takes a lot of doing, man. It really does. Like to get to a point where, like at first, when I first started, I didn't want to come on camera, nothing.
Same.
But then I sucked it up and got over it, got over the fact that, Microsoft has all of my conversations, all of my topics, like, so once you get over all that stuff, it kind of allows you to live a little, what I mean? To be like, you know what? Might as well have a good time jabbing about it while we can. Cause, who knows what's next.
Yeah. All right, man.
Right on, bro.
Will you let everybody know how to find your work? Your
for
podcast?
sure. Yeah, absolutely. You can find my work. No, it's a guilty pleasure. My podcast is Red Thread Podcast, and I'm just about everywhere podcasts are. As Mikey knows, I was having some issues with Apple. So if you're a wizard out there and you can hook me up with an Apple ID, hit me up. But anyway, I'm Randy, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you having me. You can find pretty much every podcast player. So
nice. All right, brother. Well, it was great talking to you. Great meeting you, and we'll see you next time. And
absolutely, sounds good, dude. Have a good night.
You too.
One day liberty won't exist, and Britannia won't raise a flag, and everything you know will be past tense. Need any help with your bags up? Are you checking out early again? No one this day, you're not worried. Oh, you're not thinking about it. Thinking about it. Just sipping down your fizz and letting taste turn to delight. Take the rough with the smooth and fast food at midnight. A deafening noise that has no sound. It's your ignorance that's not winner sense. Forget it ever happened if it has nothing to do with me. So what should I care for you? Because it's the truth. Just sipping down your fears and letting taste turn to delight.
Joining. Do.
Hello. Hey, what's up, buddy?
going on?
It's good to meet you, man. It's good to meet
Yeah.
you.
Finally.
Yeah, no doubt, dude. It's been an interesting last couple of months, man. Just trying to refine balance, after some changes in life and
Oh yeah.
getting there, But
I know what that's like. That it's just constant. I that's why I haven't been doing a lot of shows. Just real life just gets in the way, and
for sure. And if you're not vibing with it at the moment, I've found out that it's better not to force something. Like, if you're pinched for time and it's like you're in a frantic state, maybe better to not jump into, a first interaction or meeting with somebody. If there's like a hectic going on in life and you're not able to kind of put that aside, in short order. I don't like to drag my emotional state too much into my podcast work. You know what I mean? I do share, emotional things, but try not to bring that so much out to the fine folks out there, in the universe. Like to put it out, the energy that I would anticipate kind of receiving back in some fashion.
For sure.
That seems to be, the biggest thing that I've noticed is in putting something out into the world or, the digital universe or the airwaves or what have you. You're exercising your intent to
Oh yeah, for sure.
to learn. Maybe it's just your intent to learn about something, right? Like, so I'll go on podcasts and have some of my own episodes about the old world, and all these different aspects of it. And just keeps kind of like growing, so what do? You sink a little more intention into it and you talk about it with a couple more people, and then you just dig a little bit deeper, find something else out you didn't know. And the crazy thing is almost every day you're finding something out that kind of negates something else that you've learned. So you're constantly having to shift your mindset and go, well, you can never settle for the thing where you think you know anything, because you really kind of don't. Just when you think everything's a lie, something that you thought was a lie becomes true in your eyes, and you're like, well, all right, my whole paradigm is just destroyed right now with this. Kind of like the whole flat earth argument's kind of one of those paradigm destroying kind of concepts, that leads to a lot of other conversations, though, for sure.
Well, first of all, I just want to let you know that my schedule is just wide open tonight, so we can go as long as or short as you need to. I mean, I'm down to just have a conversation and just be chill.
For sure.
I don't try to format it like a real radio like segment where all right, we got 25 minutes and then we'll have a break here. And here.
Right. Well, that's cool, man.
Yeah. I did that for a while and it just wasn't fun.
Yeah, it seems like when you listen to, even if it's a podcast and they're segmented up like that, like say they're doing like Revolution Radio or something, you know what I mean, and they've got their slot that they're filling.
Yeah,
you can always kind of hear that in their voice that there's either like maybe they don't have the content they need to fill it, and they get a little bit nervous about it, have nothing to talk about, so you're like, oh, they're sitting in a studio doing this the old school way, you know what I mean? They're sitting down, buying the time, or however it works, and allotting themselves that, where it was like, for me, personally, I have the luxury of just being in my living room, you know what I mean, hopping on, and being able to really kind of control the flow of things is kind of nice too. So the long format, of podcasts that myself and a lot of other folks out there are doing, a couple hours or so average, it is kind of better suited to like an entire conversation, as opposed to like when you and I were growing up watching Discovery Channel, you had 30 minutes of information, little digestible chunks. You never really got to the bottom of anything. Nothing was ever really discovered, right, or figured out. It just kind of always left you like on this endless cliffhanger, and
questions lead to more questions.
Right. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast, right? Like the nature of this process that we're all kind of going through. But first and foremost, let me introduce myself. I'm Randy from Red Thread Podcast, and I'm finally able to get with Mikey Jayy over here. For sure, dude. I'm the worst at like leading into things the wrong way or haphazardly is the best way to put it. Just kind of like, so hey, how's it going?
Oh yeah.
And that's about like, that's the gist of my intro. I got to work on that maybe a little, but there's changes afoot in kind of all aspects of life right now, so it's all up in the air when it comes to anything that I have done previous to this point, and the things I'm going to do after might be very different animals. I'm getting more comfortable in my own skin, so might have different characters that I like to do kind of coming out. And as long as people don't take it as racist, because you know how people are, you put on an accent and suddenly you're racist. It's like, well, I don't think that any of my listeners would, right, white and put on an accent, ding ding, so luckily my demographic is predominantly the age group that doesn't think everything's racist like the younger kids do.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, man, it's wild. But yeah, so it's good to meet you, man, and finally get with you. It's been some time coming here, but I'm glad I can make it.
If you don't mind, I like to do my intro and then I'll introduce you, and then we can just come on and just start conversing.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'll cue you in when it's your time to come in.
Sounds good, dude.
Because I want you to hear the intro. That way you can like, if you hear something that you want to like, chime in on, you can.
Sounds good.
After I introduce you.
No worries. Go for it, buddy.